So all the votes have been counted and the Scottish Parliament election for 2026 is over. It's done. We know the results. We'll just run you through them in a second. Here with me, I'm Conor Matchett. I'm Chief Politics Writer at the Scottish Sun. We've got the Associate Editor and columnist, Chris Musson. We're going to take you through some of the main talking points of the Holyrood election results. Briefly, unless you've been living under a rock, the SNP won 58 seats. We've got a joint second with Reform and Scottish Labour on 17. The Greens coming into third on 15th, or with 15 seats. I think, is that fourth? I can never remember. It's like equals 2 and then it's 4. Tories are on 12 and the Lib Dems are on 10. Chris, it's all change and yet it's not.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, pretty much exactly as we expected with the SNP. There was some doubt, what would they get? 50, would they get up to 65? Something in the middle. It's ended up as 58 seats. So they've won by a big distance, but this bizarre thing is that, you know, they've actually lost votes on last time.
Yeah.
Yeah, the vote share is down significantly. The MSP number is down, you know, which could present issues for them in the next Parliament.
Mm-hmm.
But they've won by a mile, and they've won by a mile thanks to this reform, this double-pronged thing of Reform surging and Labour falling in support from where they were in 2024. Now, Labour's support is only actually down very slightly on 2021, but the next staging post was that general election, and Labour are a long way down from there. So this Reform rise coupled with the Labour slump has been a huge gift to the SNP.
I mean, the Labour 2021 result, I mean, I remember well, it was considered an aberration, something never to be repeated, blamed on the former leader, Richard Leonard. Anna Sawar had been in post for a couple of months at this point. They said, this is as bad as it'll get, and it's gotten worse. I mean, we'll come on to what this means for Labour in a bit, but I mean, if we look across the board, the three establishment parties of the Parliament, in terms of the ones with the largest seats before this election, have all been punished by voters in some way. The SNP dropped 10 points on the constituency ballot, 13 on the list. The Tories have dropped by about 10 to 12% on both, and Labour have gone backwards significantly, as you say, from 24, but also slightly from 2021. Voters are clearly, before we even get to turnout, disillusioned with what's on offer.
No, absolutely. And let's get on to turnout. It was 53%, I think, which was around about what we were expecting. There were some fears it might tip under 50%, and indeed it did in a lot of areas. But, the reality is here that half of people who were registered to vote didn't even bother. And there's been a lot of talk about this meh factor, and that is clearly alive and well. But the way that the system is, the way the electoral system is, this is played perfectly for the SNP, and indeed it's been a huge boost for the Greens as well, who have surged to 15. That's right, isn't it?
Yeah, 15 seats.
And a good day as well for the Lib Dems, who've gone up from this tiny rump to 10. They'll be absolutely over the moon with that. In fact, Alex Cole-Hamilton who's already been popping the champagne this morning, possibly in his peach suit.
God, I hope not. That peach suit is an aberration of fashion. Not that I can talk, but let's talk about Reform Factor. You mentioned the stuff around how their emergence in this election has really kind of set the cat among the pigeons. I mean, looking at their results, they've probably underperformed compared to maybe where some polls had them. We were talking early on in the campaign about them on 20% across the board. They've ended up with 16% on the constituencies, 16.6 on the regional list, and they've ended up with a decent whack of MSPs around 17, which I know from talking to Reform folk is banging where they were expecting to finish. But the real impact of a new party and a new pro-union party, at least notionally, as the Tories would argue, is that they have split that anti-NAT vote.
They did, and this was always going to happen, right? I mean, hate to say I told you so and all that, but
you told me so.
At the end of 2024, when Reform had started creeping up in the polls, they were under 10% at that point, but you could see them edging up in Scotland. And I'd said at that point, just pre-Christmas 2024, we did a mock-up of John Swinney on Nigel Farage's knee saying, you know, Reform are the greatest gift to the Nats. And so it has transpired. That's exactly what's happened. They have basically allowed the SNP to come through the middle in seat after seat after seat, where the SNP has lost vote share, but ended up winning by fairly fine margins in relative terms. We saw it last night over and over again. Probably one of the best examples was the Aberdeen seat that Stephen Flynn, the SNP Westminster leader, who came up and wants to come to Holyrood and indeed succeeded. Congratulations, Stephen. But it was very, very close, right? Yeah. Liam Kerr of the Tories would have been over the line had 7,000 people almost not gone to Reform.
I think the turnout, the majority even for Stephen Flynn was about 1,000, 1,500.
Yeah, that's very right. Close. And that pattern was then repeated in various seats across the country where you saw the SNP sneaking through the middle.
Another good example being East Lothian's Coast and the Lammermuirs, or whatever that new seat's called, which is obviously Douglas Alexander's general election seat as Scotland Secretary in Labour. Martin Whitfield, the Labour MSP, widely expected to win. It was the top Labour target to take off the SNP, and he lost it by a handful of votes due to a surge in Reform votes. Yeah,
absolutely. And I mean, Reform didn't win a single constituency. Mm-hmm. They won all their seats on the list, so there's some sore folk on the pro-union side sort of saying, Reform, why the hell did they stand in constituencies? If they hadn't, then we would have seen a far greater reduction in SNP seat numbers, etc., etc. So it's as you say, it's all change in one way, but at the same time, we've got the same SNP government, got some new faces, but they're also old faces as well, because there's a lot of MPs come up who lost their seats at the 2024 general election, who've now ended up in Holyrood for the SNP. So new faces, but also old faces, and the same government now for a fifth term, which is remarkable.
I was going to ask, I mean, the thing that we have to look at for the next 5 years, we were talking about it before the election, is that, big challenges, those structural challenges facing Scotland. Just off the top of my head, we've got a £5 billion fiscal black hole that the SNP have put forward for the next 5 years. Some people thought that was part of the logic of giving that to Labour and watching them struggle with it. In reality, it's now going to be John Swinney's problem to fix. Yeah. However, they're going to be trying to work with a Scottish Green Party, most likely, and probably the Scottish Lib Dems, who backed John Swinney's last two budgets as well, both of whom want more money spent on more things. I mean, the Scottish Greens want free bus travel for everybody. They want a massive expansion of childcare. That's before we get talking about other expensive commitments like new ferries for the Western Isles. I mean, there's a lot of challenges and problems being stored up, isn't there, for the next 5 years for the country?
I mean, Holyrood, the Scottish Government needs to spend less, or it needs to tax a hell of a lot more. There's no way around that. It's not just me saying that, not just you saying that. No. There's independent economist after independent economist, and it's in the Scottish Government's own medium-term financial strategy as well. They know that this projection for the 4.8 billion spending gap by 2030, that's the Scottish Government's numbers. Yeah. They know that they've got to fill that gap, and there's nothing in their manifesto which shows how they're going to do that. In fact, there's £1.4 billion of extra spending commitments. So they're heading for a reckoning somehow. They're going to have to do something about this because, as John Swinney correctly says, we always balance the books. Well, yeah, you do, but it's going to become increasingly challenging to do so.
And let's talk a little bit about independence as well. We've got, I think it's been termed by pro-independence supporters as the largest pro-independence majority in the history of devolution. For clarity, that's by one MSP. It's 73. We had 72 in 2011 and 72 in 2021. So it's not exactly a thumping victory, but it is something that pro-independence supporters, potentially John Swinney, and we heard from Ross Greer last night, that they might well spend the next 5 years still pushing for that referendum?
Yeah, absolutely. This is an odd one. Numbers wise, let's deal with these numbers first. So yeah, a clear majority there in terms of seats for independence, pro-independence. But then, others point to the vote share. If you look at the vote share, there is a clear majority in the other direction for people voting for pro-union parties. So, that will be argued. That'll be argued in reverse. So what actually happens now? Well, Swinney has said, and they said in their manifesto, that an SNP majority is the precedent for an independence referendum. Of course, he didn't get that. And the sneaking suspicion, and I've written about this several times before, has been that Swinney doesn't actually want to deal with a referendum or to deal with that issue at the forefront in the next Parliament. And he set the bar there almost impossibly high. He didn't have to do that. They could have written into that manifesto that a Holyrood pro-independence majority of multiple parties, so the Greens as well, was the bar. He didn't. He put an SNP majority. So he's done that deliberately, right? I think. And it doesn't mean that he's not going to talk about it, but I think it means that he knows it's not going to happen.
I certainly wonder whether or not he's looked at it from a situation of the independence argument is not strong enough at the minute to fight about it for 5 years and repeat the mistakes of Nicola Sturgeon's 2016 to 21 term. And I wonder whether or not he's looking at Alex Salmond's 2007 term as a restoration of competence, financial management, good governance, and go, let's get back to basics. Yeah. Let's show how we can do this properly.
Well, if there's a route to independence, that's it, right? It is to govern well and to, convert or at least gain the trust of those people who would tend to be pro-union supporters. Yeah. That is going to be the only way to independence, and the SNP are nowhere near that at the moment. So maybe if Swinney, addresses that in the next 5 years and goes back to that Salmond-esque style of governance. But, given the troubles ahead that we talked about, the fiscal issues, that's going to be very difficult. And especially he's relying on the Greens now. So the SNP and the Greens have got this in common. They've got this pro-independence thing in common, right? And you would think, well, that's going to enable Swinney to get them on side to pass various things. But if that falls away because Swinney quietly tries to park it, then what have they got? Because the Swinney is definitely a more small C conservative SNP leader. Yeah. A lot of the things that the Scottish Greens want to do, he's not going to do. It could get quite awkward. You could see the Greens throwing their toys out the pram again fairly quickly if they lose this common ground over independence, because the Greens are very impatient, right, for an independence referendum.
It's also, last word on independence is the other thing that's in the background here that people may have missed, or certainly I think has gone underspoken about in the UK context, is we now have, for the first time in history, the three smaller Celtic nations, Wales, Northern Ireland and Scotland, all led by parties who want to break up the United Kingdom. That's the SNP in Scotland, it's Plaid Cymru in Wales, and it's Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland. I mean, that as a image and as a political challenge for Westminster and for Sir Keir Starmer or whoever comes next, that's an opportunity for those countries and those parties and pro-independence supporters in all three nations to make the case over the next 5 years.
It is, and I think we'll see a lot of that happening rather than the nuts and bolts of another independence referendum in Scotland and perhaps the preparation of a bill that Swinney talked about being sidelined. We'll see a lot of soaring big picture rhetoric, perhaps in conjunction with those others, because it's going to be very difficult for the SNP not to get swept along with that.
Absolutely. Let's talk about Scottish Labour. I mean, this was meant to be the big return to government for the party. I mean, Anas Sarwar, if you think back to 2024, it's not that long ago. It's only 22 months ago. He was riding the wave of Sir Keir Starmer's own loveless majority across the UK. I mean, Scotland, they thumped the SNP in 2024, and it's all gone horribly, horribly wrong. Anas Sarwar and many others within his party are blaming the Prime Minister.
Yeah, they are. And, they're right to, because ultimately public opinion has been significantly influenced, if not entirely, by what's been going on at Westminster. I said this today, it was a sort of, it's a kind of least worst kind of feel to this election. The least worst option has been the SNP this time around. A lot of people looked and they thought, Starmer or Swinney, even though that wasn't technically the choice. People can vote for whatever reasons they want, and this was a judgment on Starmer.
But do you not think this Scottish Labour have to take a degree of responsibility? There's some chat that Douglas Alexander, who's the co-campaign director with Jackie Bailey, he, as the Scottish secretary, that his strategy hasn't gone well. There was some eviscerating analysis from the former Better Together and Labour spin doctor Paul Sinclair on TV yesterday, who said, Labour's strategy was have Anas Sarwar flirt with the country and hope that we all fell in love with him. Mm-hmm. It didn't work. They've got to answer to that, surely, in the next few years.
Yeah, it didn't work. I mean, they focused on constituencies in the Central Belt at the loss of everything else. They didn't focus on the regional list seats across the country and suffered badly for it because all the chips in one basket on a lot of these three-way races in the Central Belt. And, overwhelmingly they lost. And, they were still very confident behind the scenes that the polls would be defied. But ultimately, there were very, very fine margins and they couldn't bank on anything. And they shouldn't have banked on anything. They should have broadened their offer around Scotland. They'd alienated the northeast of Scotland with Labour's North Sea policy and didn't attempt to make any inroads whatsoever. They've only got themselves to blame. And as I've said previously as well, their manifesto, they went back to this word change at the end, but, I'm struggling to think of one big policy still in the Scottish Labour manifesto which would have led to the change that was being promised. It was, it was lackluster, to say the least. I was going to use a far ruder word there, but it was not good, the manifesto.
So there is a question about Anas Sarwar, whether or not he should stay on. He has had 5 years to make his case, but the issue there is they've lost a lot of good people at this election. A lot of good people haven't been elected for them. Is there anyone who's going to take it off him?
I guess there will be, because these are politicians, right? They get into politics because they want to lead. So I don't think there'll be an issue there. And I think maybe after a period of reflection, maybe not necessarily in the next few days, he'll probably quit now. Me having said that, I think he's going to go, because the big question for me is, why would he want to stick around now?
Yeah.
I mean, another 5 years of being on a hiding to nothing and no indication that at the end of that 5 years it'll be anything other than the same or worse result. Why would he want to stick around?
Malcolm Offord and Reform UK, they aimed, as I said earlier, for about 15 to 18 MSPs. They've ended up on 17 MSPs. Scottish Labour have ended up with 17 MSPs. We have the joint second place in Parliament for the first time, I think, in the history of devolution. God knows how that's going to work out.
Well, there's no official opposition at Holyrood, right? Like there is at Westminster. So what actually happens is going to be down to a committee of MSPs in this Parliamentary Bureau and the presiding officer to determine who speaks when, who gets the first question at First Minister's questions, etc. I suspect what will happen if they remain tied, nobody defects, say, to Reform from the Tories, and they'll be trying their best to do that, to get that one extra MSP. I suspect what will happen is, they take the first question 1 week at FMQs and the other party takes it the following week. It would be a strange sort of spectacle, but it's great for the SNP, isn't it? I mean, they're way ahead of everyone else, and they can play off all these parties against each other in terms of trying to get their support for votes. And one thing that we're going to see from John Swinney time and again is, he's going to say, well, you're voting with the SNP or you're voting with Reform. He'll present every vote as you either side with the SNP or you side with Reform. I mean, of course, it's preposterous, right? Just because you don't vote with the SNP and you happen to vote on the same side as Reform doesn't mean you endorse everything that Reform does. But the SNP will sure as hell be presenting absolutely everything as that and trying and continuing to demonise Reform as much as possible and to taint their opponents by association. So, it's going to be a fascinating spectacle.
A couple of big names. We had a couple of big beasts losing their seats, at least in Holyrood terms. Yeah. And one that we were keeping a very close eye on. We gave everybody a hint a couple of weeks ago with a story in our Monday paper. That
it's your story. Connor's very pleased because Conor wrote a story saying that Angus Robertson was going to lose his seat, or probably was going to,
and he did.
Conor was terrified that this story would end up, being exposed as a load of bollocks.
Yep.
But it hasn't been. Well done, Conor.
Victory
Fantastic.
For me. Vindicated.
So Angus Robertson lost his seat to the Greens' Lorna Slater.
Yeah.
In fact, he came third, didn't he, in the Edinburgh Central seat? I mean, it's a huge kind of loss for the SNP. That. So what the SNP often do is they put their prize candidates on the regional list too at the top as a backup. They've done that in the past, but they didn't.
Good example actually in this election is Marie Todd, who lost in Caithness, Sutherland and Ross to the Lib Dems, but got in late last night, about 1:30 on the regional list.
Yeah, but not Angus. He was down at 4th on the regional list, so he's got no way back in. I suspect they'll find some sort of job for Angus in the party or government, but we'll see about that.
Let's finish this off. I think we could talk more about the Green Surge, but I think let's talk about the big picture, which is what the results in Scotland mean alongside the results in England and in the results in Wales for the Prime Minister. I mean, in England, the Labour Party have been decimated. It's maybe not quite as bad as people predicted. Yeah. They've lost power in Wales, a place they've dominated for a century, to Plaid Cymru, and any chance of a good day or a slightly less bad day in Scotland has been absolutely run over by Reform as well. Yeah. I mean, how long does the Prime Minister survive? Does he go at all? Is the chat of his departure because of the fact that everybody is blaming him for these results? Maybe, are we talking about it too early?
That was a really long question.
It was.
And I'll give you a short answer, which is that he's got to go. He's got to go, and he's got to go sooner rather than later. I don't think he will. I think he'll cling on, but he's got to go because he's a total busted flush now. And the longer he stays on, the worse it's going to get for Labour. Who
replaces him?
Wow. Well, they're bound to make an absolutely catastrophic choice there as well, aren't they? There's no obvious good choice at the moment. Let me put it that way.
Which is arguably part of the problem for those people who are trying to oppose him and get him out of the job, isn't it? I mean, well, we could throw some names out there: Ed Miliband, Angela Rayner, Wes Streeting, Andy Burnham. No obvious route, no obvious, groundswell of support.
No, each of those have got their own problems and issues. Really, you need somebody who's fresh to come out of out of the centre, and for Labour to pin themselves back in that centre ground. But I don't know who that person will be right now.
Well, there we have it. That's the Holyrood 2026 election all said and done. We're going to have loads of reaction in the paper, online, and everywhere over the next couple of days and weeks. All the MSPs will go into Holyrood on Tuesday to start their induction and swearing in. We'll have a new presiding officer on Thursday, and I think we'll have our First Minister's questions with the new Parliament on the 21st of May in a couple of weeks. But loads still to happen. Keep up to date online and by picking up the paper. Chris, thank you very much.
Cheers.
And thank you very much for watching.